Right, so we're going to be working for a bit of an alternative way of approaching acrylics this morning. We're going to be looking at building up some layers and working through some tonal contrasts, but the best way to deal with that to start off with is to have a toned background. Now this project is inspired by this beautiful brown wooden fence photograph of a sunset by Chris F from Pexels. It's royalty free, so you can print that off from Pexels without any worries. Then you need to have a primed piece of paper or canvas, some kind of surface that you want to work on. This one's been Gesso twice. It's just a piece of cartridge paper, it's fairly thick. I've drawn a boundary of where I roughly plan to put this image once I'm ready, so it gives me a starting off point. It's only small, it's about A5. Now to tone it, I'm going to tone it a greyish tone. So think storm cloud kind of grey. We're going for that kind of grey that you can see starting to come through. It's always better to have too much paint than not enough. So if in doubt, make a decent quantity. You'll find that you'll need a fair sized brush to get the paint down quite quickly, because you know how quickly acrylics can dry. There's no perfect tone of grey with this. If you want to go lighter you can do, if you want to go darker you can do. Just don't go too dark, because you've got to draw in some darker tones to start off the main process. Right, I'm going to go for that. Right, let's start getting this in here. Now you need to wait and make sure that this is dried thoroughly before we start the main painting process. So I'd clean out your brush, and you can give it bits of a hairdryer if you want to speed it up, or you could have done it before class and made sure that you've got the coverage right. Right, as you can see here, I've toned my piece of paper using black and white to generate a kind of storm cloud grey. It's dried out. It's a little bit wet because I can see the paper has slightly buckled, whatever you want to call it. But it's good enough to work on. It's acrylic, so it dries fairly quickly. I've got here my reference image. I also have my colours ready to rock and roll on my, well, it's basically a popcorn box lid. So if you wanted to make this a bit more of a bigger project, I'd recommend probably a more stay dry palette. It means that the colours will stay wet for longer and make your life a lot easier for the blending. For my colour range, I've got my white, my black, my ultramarine blue, my cobalt blue, my crimson red, cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, and then I threw in an optional purple, as you can see from the list given out on the email. I've got a number 1 brush to start me off, so I don't want anything too long on the hairs of the head. I don't want it hugely thick. You'll find a round pointed end brush is easy to get this first stage of the drawing down. I've also got some fluid retarder, which I'll probably be using a little bit later on to keep my paint nice and wet, and that means that I can blend colours in easier. Obviously I have a water pot as well, and I have a piece of tissue which can come in handy for just making sure my brush is thoroughly clean and stopping any cross contamination. Now to get on for the first stage of this project, what you're looking at generating is more of a Prussian blue. So if you take your ultramarine blue and you add in some black, you'll get that navy Prussian blue without having to buy it off the art shelf. Now you have to get the balance right. If you've got too much black in it, it's going to be black. If you've got too much blue, it's going to be blue. If you're in doubt, you can always put a little bit on the edge of your picture just to check the tone, and that looks pretty good to me. So I am going to draft in, first of all, the main structure in this lower bottom section using that colour. If I'm finding the paint is a little bit too thick, I can take a bit of water, but remember the water will speed up the drying, it'll thin it down. If you wanted to, you could use your fluid retarder as well at this stage. That'll thin down the paint, but also mean that it stays wet. just coming across here. And that's the basic first stage. Then we need to move on to something a little bit more complicated. So clean your brush, give it a wipe through the tissue. You're going to start getting cross-contamination otherwise, and you really don't need cross-contamination from this next stage. Then you're looking at taking your lemon yellow, adding some white, and making this really quite bleached out yellow. So we've done the dark shadows, we're plotting in where we think they are. We're going to be working over the top and refining them. We're not worried about any errors that we've made at that stage. We're just thinking things through, looking at scale, checking everything is roughly in the right place. Then we're going to come in with our highlights and we're going to put those in. So I'm putting in my sun that's just peeking through the cloud. Over here. Watch that blue, you can see that blue's still wet. I just picked some up, so clean your brush, pick some up. Right. And lay in where you reckon you're going to get that highlight coming through. Remember, it's acrylics, it's very forgiving. We can work more into the paint as it dries, like so. So I've got that highlight up there. I'm just going to create a little bit more of a soft lemon orangey shade by adding in that cadmium yellow. So I'll warm it up, and I'm throwing that warmed up yellow into the mix now. Then I'm going to add some cadmium red, just a little bit, and cadmium yellow to make an orange. This orange does need to be tinted out with white to make it lighter, or it's going to be just too harsh. And you can see that the sky is starting to come together. Watch out, like I said, cross-contamination. I'm going to paint more orange into this. This is just the earlier stages. I'm going to increase a little bit of white for that sunshine, because it's not quite harsh enough compared to where I want it to go. So let's take that white. Now I'm going to take that orange that I was building up on. So remember, it's cadmium yellow plus cadmium red to make a nice orange. It's a warm orange, because we've used warm colours. And I'm going to start throwing in some of the soft light as well of orange down here on the snow as it's reflecting. You can see that the process is fundamentally we put down the strong, hard shadows as the main structure of the picture in the first stage. Then we're coming in and building up our highlights, looking at reflections of light and tone, bringing those into our picture, building up more accurate observations, and then we're going to work the mid-tones. Think about how you're using your brush, application of your paint. Also, whether you need to tint out a little bit with the white, because you can see here some really strong sunlight reflections in the snow. Now these are going to probably end up becoming a little bit more pinky orange, but it's good to get this in your head at the earlier stages. You're also looking at where light is bouncing off things and where shadows are being cast. So the next stage that I can see that is quite strong is just along here. You got this rickety old fence. You get light bouncing off the beams in between. Okay, we've got some highlights on these piles of snow. Still a tad wet to be working at, but that's what we can get done. Okay, so you should be getting something like this at this stage. You've had your strong structural design laid out, looking at your proportions, your drawing observations. You've then started to put down the lighter areas of tone. We obviously have a lot more light to put down, but we're just thinking about things and the balance of light to dark and the contrast that creates within the artwork. Then we're going to start working up some bigger sections. So let's work in, first of all, this lighter orange down here. Since we've got our oranges mixed up, it would be wise to do so. I'd say that's quite a warm orange, so again, I'm using that red, cadmium red with cadmium yellow to get quite a powerful orange. Now, if you look at this, you can see it fades out into more of a pinky purple as it comes down. It would be wise to have both colours pre-made on your palette. I also think I'll probably need a bigger brush to do this, so I'm going to swap up brushes. And I'm going to create a little bit more of my orange because, like I said, in that first stage when you're mixing the tone for your paper, it's wise to have too much of a colour when it comes to acrylic, but not enough. Okay, and then I'm going to have a purple. So I'm going to take my ultramarine blue and my crimson red, and I'm going to make my purple. Now you can use your pre-made purple, pre-bought purple if you want. It's completely up to you. If you make it, you'll be able to take the tone up and down a lot easier, but the pre-made purple will be handy later on, as you will see. So I've got that dark purple there. Now with this, if I use a crimson red, I'm going to get more of a lilac-y purple. If I use a cadmium red, it'll become more plummy. So look at the type of picture you've got and whether you've got plummy. Mine goes a bit more plummy, but I want to use these for the harder shadow tones over here. And because I want it to go pink, the crimson red will give me a better pink than the cadmium red. Right, I'm going to take my orange, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just like 2 drops of fluid retarder to slow down the drying process. I'm stirring that into my colour. Now if you haven't got fluid retarder, don't worry about it, it's just if those students that do have. I'm also going to do the same to my purple. I'm going to stir that into my purple. It'll keep it all wet. Now I've got 2 brushes, one orange, one purple. And I'm going to start building in this area of cloud that's lit up by the sunlight. I'm going to add a little bit more white to thicken the paint because it does seem a little bit translucent. I'm guessing that's probably a fluid retarder, which means I'm going to have to add more of the red and the yellow to boost the saturation of the colour. I'm trying to paint around my trees, and if I want to, I can increase the yellow content and make the shades a little bit more brighter. Then as the shade comes to my left, I'm adding in a little bit more red. Now I'm going to jump and use a crimson red because I've used the crimson red in the purple, so that I know it'll automatically look more natural when it blends into it. I need to blend in that crimsony orange into the shade that I've already got and make it look natural. It's graduation. I'm going to take my purple brush and bring in some of my purple shadow down here. Now it's very mild, look how mild it is down here, so I do not need much. I'm then going to take my orange and work my orange up. I'm being careful about getting my brush too dirty with any cross contamination from that purple at this stage. Just going to work in here. And now once I'm happy, I'm going to take off that excess orange. So my brush has just got a little bit of cross contamination, and I'm going to work that into the purple shade so that it gets mixed in with the amount of paint that I have on my brush. Now I still feel like that's a little bit more pinky, so I'm going to add a little bit more of a red, crimson red, remember makes some more of that pinky tone. And bring that in for this study. And remember it's a study, it's just a little one where we're looking at how light is reacting. You should be getting something kind of like this if all is going well with your picture. Now remember, we want to just work the picture as a whole. So as we've got this orange up here and we're looking at that orange reflecting into the lower sections, I'd recommend getting some of that orange and dabbing it in. Try and leave some of the initial highlight that you've got from the first stage of the light tones. Don't overwork it all. Just dabble. like so. Now let's just work on that orange above, because we've got the purple that we've got in this upper atmosphere section. We've got this lovely soft cloud light bouncing out, so it's going to prove much tougher. I'm going to clean my brush off a little bit so I get rid of all that cross contamination. You may find that you have to keep cleaning your water. Okay, I've still got my purple on my brush over here. Now it's a little bit more pinky, which is why I keep talking to you about that pinky orange. So let's make a little bit more of a pinkier orange. Using my crimson, well, using your crimson red. I'm going to add a little bit of white to soften it down, and then increase the amount of red. You can see it gets a much more softer tone of pink, and I'm going to start putting that down in here. Thinking about my brushes, I'm thinking about how they're curving around to represent the sky and the cloud surface texture. I'm being quite loose and rhythmic with my brush marks. I might nip up here and have a little bit more orange where the sun particularly affects this part of the sky. So I'll just bring that up, create a little bit more, a few sun rays breaking through. And then come back on my pink. And I'm playing around with the tone of the pink. If I can see any orange, which I can see like a little bit of an orange band coming up into here, I'm going to work that in. I'm going to take that off, but keep the cross contamination on purpose. And I'm going to bring my pinky orange along there and start folding it in. Like so. Now I'm going to grab some of my purple, start bringing that in, and I'm going to lighten that purple. A little bit of water onto my brush and smooth that purple out into my pink orange sky. Do a little bit more, so keep it simple, do a little bit at a time because the acrylics dry so fast. Take a clean wet brush and smooth that lilac shade out into your sky. Now I'm going to clean my purple brush so that I can get some strong purple on it, because up here it's really quite a hit of purple tone. I've still got my wet brush. I'm going to smooth that out to make it look natural and organic. I'm going to add in a little bit more paint because I'm running out. So it's that ultramarine with crimson I quite like, and I'm going to increase the amount of crimson in there. It gets darker at the top. I get my wet brush, work that out into my paint, being really expressive. Now I might want to darken the top section, so I can flood in a little bit more paint if I want to. Or if you feel like you've added too much, you can take tissue and just dab it out. You need to be quick while the paint's wet. And it should be giving you a nice tonal change. It's quite impressionistic, it's very pretty. The other section I can see here is I've got a little bit more shadow in here, so I'm going to take a little bit of my purple and just working out a little bit more of a shadow tone around this cloud base. And I'm still using the same technique, so I've got that wet brush. I'm just bleeding it out into the shade of the acrylics wherever I feel that it's necessary. Light, loose, feathery brush marks. Okay. I'm going to darken down here with a little bit more of that purple. So I'm putting the purple down, just working it in a little bit of clean water, smoothing it out. And then let's work down into this section down here. So I'm going to refine some detail, and I'm going to do a little bit more nicer work on my fence poles using my purple. And it's good to use purple at this stage on the fence poles, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use green for the trees. The green will give a really good shadow tone for the trees, but you need it to slightly contrast with the shadow that you're getting on the fence poles. So using two different colours that are made by one colour that unites them. Green's made from blue and yellow, purple's made from blue and red, therefore they'll look quite good together, they're harmonic on the old colour wheel. Now you can do the whole thing purple, it's, you know, personal taste, wherever you want to go with this. But I think a little bit of contrast will look really good. Okay, so let's make that dark green. Clean your brush off, take some cadmium yellow and some ultramarine blue. For any dark tones you'll always need to use ultramarine. Increase the amount of ultramarine that you've got in your green until it's just about to turn blue, and that's the green that you're looking at getting. Now if you're finding it's still too green, you might need a little bit, you could add a bit of black in there just to really zap it into the shadowy tone. When using black, always make sure that you are using other colours with it. Try not to use black just on its own. And don't feel like you have to go over that whole navy blue. You can leave parts of the navy blue if you quite like areas. So it's looking like that now. Once you've done that, we need to start working on this snow in the bottom section. So we've already got our purple made up. It's a little bit more of a bluey, colder tone. Well, I'm going to be using some Cobalt blue. And I'm going to stir that into the purple I already have. Now it looks a tad icy, so I'm adding some white. And I'm going to work that tone in. Remember that snow is very highly reflective, it's just like water. So what you've got going on in the sky is going to happen in the snow. That means we're going to need a load of purple in a little while. Just bring in some of these colder blues. Will look really nice. And use your observations where you think they should be. It's normally in between where you're seeing the shadow and the blue of the sky reflections. Right, so I'm going to take my purple, and remember, I made it, if you need to make any more, crimson and ultramarine blue. You must remember your recipe so that you can repeat them in other areas of the picture. And I'm going to start putting down some of the really hard purples. Now you could be using a tubed purple, as I showed you I've got up the top, and I will be using a little bit of that in a minute for those that have it, but if you haven't, this purple will do just as well. See those strong dark shadows. So I'm just going to use that purple. Now you need to lighten your purple. So that is a tube purple lightened. You could lighten that purple and start putting in some of those really soft lilac-y shades. They're bouncing from the sky. Now my purple's slightly off because I was using that mixed purple just to show you how it looks, but hopefully you're using the same purple. If not, it's not a problem. What you'll find is you need to do a little bit of this purple for your tubed, which can be a really pretty purple, showing quite strong highlights depending on how much white you want to add in with it. And then lighten up your sky purple. Got that lighter purple, I've taken some white, added it in and put it in here. To be quite honest, the more colour range you've got, the more interesting you're going to find this. But you do need to look at where you're putting in your colours. And if you want to go a little bit darker with that purple, see, you can play around with it. Now the other thing in here, scope, remember we've got that pink, so it would be really wise to put some of that pink in as well. And I'll just work in some of the lilac-y tones. bit like crimson. You can see there, you can pinken it up. A bit more pink down here. Pinky purple. Now I want you to paint what you can see, because your printout's going to look a little bit different, or if you're using a screen, it's going to look a bit different from my picture. So do paint what you can see. Now lighten it up a little bit more for some of here, what I can see just poking through here. Yours can be a lot more refined, you've got a bit more time than I have. You should be getting something like this. Now, once you got to this stage, then if I was you, I'd look over and see where you might want to refine things and clean stuff up. So for me, I can see that there should be a little bit more yellow band down here. I'm going to take this orangey yellow, make it a little bit more yellow, and lighten it out and really give it a bit more of a harder shot of colour to exaggerate that light piercing through the clouds. That means I'm just going to add in a little bit more of a stronger highlight now, because I've strengthened that. So remember, it has a knock-on effect with everything. Consider the whole picture working together. You should end up hopefully with something